So, hello everybody, and welcome to this Land Condition Early Careers Network event. So today's event is a joint event between the IES, REMSOC, and the Ireland Brownfield Network. This has been organised for our Land Condition Early Career Network, and the workshop will be delivered by Kate, who are an organisation created to solve the people management puzzle of supporting managers to feel equipped, enabled, and empowered to carry out their role. So this workshop is really for anyone who's thinking about or embarking on their first move into managing others. That could be early line management or project management or both. The workshop will explore some of the common challenges that people experience and what personal development is really useful to focus on now. The facilitators are going to be sharing some of their research from senior managers on what they know now that they wish they knew when they first started managing others. All right, so we are delighted to be joined by two facilitators today. We have Naomi Regan and Lindsay Kitching. They both used to work in infrastructure and engineering, and they are passionate about supporting people to thrive at work. After this workshop part of the session, we will also hear from Luke Martin, and we'll properly introduce him before his session. All right, and with that, thank you so much for coming today, and I'll hand over to you, Lindsay and Naomi.
Thank you, Jo. Thanks, everybody. And lovely to have you all here. And thank you for asking us back after our workshop last year, which was all around sort of introduction to people management. So we had a chat with Sarah and Ethne about what else might be useful to spend some time thinking about. And really, this is 90 minutes of just giving you a bit of space and time to think about what's the tricky stuff that happens at work in terms of those conversations that we need to have. And what we want to really do is to use this time just to explore, well, what are those conversations and why do they feel tricky or sticky or give us that sometimes feeling in our tummies that do we really want to have this conversation? We know we need to, but are we feeling prepared and do we have the confidence to do it? So we're going to explore what those conversations are. And then we're going to look at how taking that knowledge and awareness, how we can create the right environment for those conversations to take place, and how can we feel more confident, more courageous to step into them. And we're also going to give you a little bit of a framework to help you use for when you're having these sorts of challenging conversations. And it's probably worth saying that this could be conversations that need to take place between you and your internal colleagues. If you have people that report into you, in terms of formal line management, it could be those sort of discussions. It could be the discussions that we have in the project teams that we work, where we're matrix managing, and that could be with people external, could even be with clients that we need to work with. So we're thinking about all sorts of relationships here that we have at work. So this is our aims for what we'd like to help you leave here with. And as Jo said at the start, and Naomi's just popped in the chat, please do join in, make this as interactive as you would like to, so you get the best out of the session. So that means using chat, if you would feel comfortable to do that by putting questions and thoughts and reflections in, or just jumping in and sharing your thoughts just by using one of the reaction buttons. So just pop your hand up to jump in, and if you like what you hear that's being shared, then you can give us thumbs up and other reactions as appropriate. So as Jo said, my name's Lindsay Kitching. I'm a chartered surveyor by background and worked in infrastructure and corporate property for 20 years. Brownfield sites in particular, former gasworks and gas holders are my bag, and I still have a gas holder plaque from a gas holder up in Macclesfield in my garage that my husband keeps telling me to get rid of, but I don't want to because it's part of my heritage and I am very proud of that. And Naomi's very similar. She's an engineer, also worked on gasworks sites, and was at one point, like Sarah, I believe, Young Brownfield Professional of the Year.
I won't say what year, but yeah, definitely was, but too long ago to want to share that.
Sarah, when was yours? Oh, you're on mute. Can't hear you. I think it was, oh, sorry, can't hear you. 2017? There you go. A bit more recent than yours then, Naomi.
2010, there we go, I'll say it.
Wonderful. So yeah, please do join in, and we do like to have some fun on these as well, so that you know, it's engaging and interesting for everybody. So the first question: what conversations are uncomfortable or take courage at work? What might those conversations be? Now, I'll kick you off with one which often comes up in our coaching and our work that we do, which is around giving people feedback. And often it's the improvement feedback that people feel really uncomfortable with. Naomi, what's a conversation that was uncomfortable for you or is uncomfortable?
Yeah, I suppose for me, if I think back to my project work when I was actually leading teams, it was conversations about either conversations about sort of promotion and when money was involved, or with clients around overspends or using contingency, those sorts of things too.
Yeah, so conversations about the commercial, the money side of things. Would you like to pop in the chat, everybody that's here with us today, what conversations might be uncomfortable for you or for others that you know of? And maybe just while they're doing that, Ethne, Jo, is there any that you would like to share as well?
Oh yeah, good question, Lindsay. Thank you. I think it's always difficult providing kind of feedback on something in a way that you don't want to hurt anyone's feelings, but you need to kind of provide constructive feedback. I think that can be quite difficult. Yeah,
you don't want to hurt people's feelings, you don't want to ruin the relationship, but you know that there needs to be a conversation there. And Matthew's put on there, thank you, around underperformance or poor behaviour as well. Jo, how about you? What makes you feel a bit uncomfortable in terms of conversations at work?
Yeah, I think one thing in particular is kind of like having new ideas that you want to like propose to people maybe in like senior management positions, and being able to kind of have the courage to put them across in a way that you think is going to have enough influence, sort of considering yeah, the best way to deliver that. I just feel like that's something that's tricky to work out how to do.
Yeah, how to have influence, how to give new ideas, challenge the way that things have always been done, maybe can feel a bit uncomfortable. Sarah, how about you?
No, I bet you it's the settings on Zoom where next to the mute button there's a little arrow.
Now?
Yes, there you go.
Oh, God, I can't believe 3 years in we're still struggling with that. Yes, I think I guess it's more like an actual conversation as such, but like when I was friends with a lot of people in the team and then I became a little bit more senior, it's like trying to separate the kind of professional from the friendship in a way. Yeah, I found having conversations with people that I consider like a friend or a peer or someone I'd worked with for a long time, if it had to be a kind of performance conversation or even just asking them to do stuff, can feel a little bit uncomfortable. So that kind of situation I found a little bit difficult.
Yeah.
And then it's very confrontational because I'm not a confrontational person, so I find that quite difficult to manage. So yeah.
Yeah, something where we need to confront something, and we'll be giving you a alternative definition for confrontation a little bit later. But very much those relationships at play where we're friends, or where we were one of the team and then we step into needing to direct, could be feeling a bit tricky. And Emma shared in the chat around agreeing around additional fees from clients, unexpected works, dealing with scope creep, all things that sometimes be quite tricky. Any other contributions people would like to share around what's tricky that maybe we haven't heard about?
It's tricky when a good member of your team has in a notice. It's always very tough.
Yeah, when somebody's leaving. So there are so many instances of when tricky conversations might happen. So here is a few. So yeah, challenging the way things have been done, asking for or giving feedback, communicating risk and costs, saying no, I can't take on any more work, or actually saying no, I can't give you the answer that what you need here. Admitting a mistake can sometimes feel really hard. Or repairing and building trust in a relationship, saying what needs to be said. Those influencing decisions that Jo mentioned, and then also something around how do we confront behaviour and attitude, which is so often performance conversations are not about the what, they're about the how and about the relationship. And how do we just embrace this discomfort? And for everybody, it's going to be different. So we all have things that we feel more comfortable with. We all have things that we feel less comfortable with. So it's an understanding of where you might currently be at this point in time.
We're back.
Hello. Hi, welcome back, everybody. Welcome back. Yeah, it's good to talk through a couple of examples with the group that I joined around, what makes us feel uncomfortable and why we avoid these conversations. Would anybody like to share, a couple of things that was common that you discussed in your group?
Yeah. I was in a group with Cathal and Annie and Joe, and the topics that came up were kind of salary negotiations, owning up to mistakes you might have made, either with clients or with your own directors or direct reports or team. Confronting people, and then Annie had a few good examples. She works in contaminated land, so you might be dealing with clients and contractors, which it naturally leads to awkward conversations.
Yeah, lots of great examples there, and things that sit behind those are all around that, our feeling of competence and being good at what we do, as well as feelings of wanting to maintain good relationships, I guess, that sits behind that as well. Thanks, Luke. How about any of the other groups? Would you like to share comments?
Yeah, I share some pointers from ours. So we felt that one of the main reasons that we don't, or that holds us back from maybe having those conversations, is when we don't know what the reaction will be like from the other party. So just that kind of worry that if we give some honest feedback or honest truth, say with a client about needing to do more work, then they might get angry. And we've had experience of clients who seem like they're your best friend, and then you give them some maybe not so favorable news, and they kind of turn, and it's that just always that possibility that someone might take it badly that then makes you feel uncomfortable about bringing things up.
Yeah, not knowing how somebody might react.
That links, I think, to something that we said, which was you almost go into these, like a lot of people will kind of talk themselves up before you go into a conversation, and you almost kind of come up with the idea of how it's going to go before you've even done it. So you're already going into it, like kind of already feeling nervous and uncomfortable, thinking it's going to spiral, when in reality, a lot of the times it doesn't, but it's that kind of perception of how it's going to be and how people are going to react.
Yeah. It's interesting, isn't it? Because Emma's response very much was we don't know how people are going to respond, but I absolutely agree. I think we don't, but we make assumptions about the worst case that's going to happen, and that drives how we feel about it very much.
Yeah, thank you for sharing those. And so We often avoid these conversations for a number of reasons. So just going to show you a few of those different reasons now. So, we connect feedback with criticism, and whether that's us delivering feedback or receiving it, we sometimes don't want to criticize, but we don't think about the positives that we can also share. We're worried how it might be received, just exactly what you shared there. And I know we talked about in the group I was in, we don't want to hurt feelings or damage relationships. I shared an example of when I was client side and there was a contract that was underperforming. I really got on with the person that was from the contractor side, and I didn't want to manage that contract in the way my boss was telling me to do, which was to be, I think, as Emma, you were sharing there, to fly off the handle and to really, give it, full barrels. So there's the relationship side of things. And maybe if we haven't had positive role models that have shown us how to do this, then it can be difficult to know what good looks like. So, there's a bit around our experiences of what we're part of and what we pick up from others. And this bit is around, are we sort of caring deeply enough about the person, the situation, the relationship, to be honest and have that phrase around, being candid in what we share. Confidence, a big part of this. If we haven't had the experience, if we've had bad experiences, then our confidence, might not be there to support us. And that, we assume people already know some of this stuff, so we don't say things. We assume that maybe they know about, the performance or their behaviour. And a big one here for, I guess, a lot of people might be saying, we just don't have the time to have the conversations. They could take, much more of the meeting or of the day than what we planned, and so we just don't have them at all. And it might feel like these would lead to a bigger problem. So it's sort of almost opening the can of worms. We don't want to do that, so we don't say anything. That's why we might avoid these conversations. So if we move along, you'll see I love this quote in particular about feedback. And feedback is challenging because it sits at the crossroads of two human needs: the need to learn and grow, but also the need to be accepted just as we are. So we might know that we need feedback to grow and develop and improve, but yet it feels uncomfortable to ask for it. And we're going to sort of delve into feedback a bit more because it sits behind so many of our work relationships. And we're going to dig into, how can we give feedback in a really great way that feels good, not just for us, but also for the person that's receiving that feedback. So first of all, what's going on in our brain? So when I say the word feedback, some of you might get like a little shudder that, just happens unconsciously. And that's because feedback typically is associated with improvement feedback, what we're not doing well. And when the brain thinks about a perceived threat to our levels of competence, to our perceived threat around our ability to have autonomy and ownership of what we do, and this bit around belonging, the bit about relationships, the bit about actually being liked, then our brains will go into a response like they did when we still lived in the caves, because that's ultimately how our brain is wired. So when they perceive there's a threat coming in the form of feedback, the brain doesn't sort of do a little bit of an assessment. It starts to release those chemicals to protect us, the adrenaline, the cortisol, which can create reactions in our brain that can actually stop us from thinking straight. That saying, I just can't think straight at the moment. That's when the prefrontal cortex part of the brain actually is slightly impaired through going into this flight or fight response. We lose our sense of humour. Probably a lot of people that know people that when they're under stress that they can't take a joke. But we also lose our ability to have empathy and to put ourselves in the other person's position. And that's why quite often when we have to have these really courageous feedback conversations or other conversations, our body tries to protect us. So we might get the, sweaty palms. Some people get a red rash that goes up their neck. Your heart starts beating, and that's our body's response to try and prepare us for this perceived threat. And because of this uncertainty, the brain actually, doesn't like uncertainty. The brain would much prefer to know that there is a bad outcome than there being uncertainty. So all of these, neuro responses, our body responses, are what's at play when we have to have these tricky, challenging conversations. So I guess the thing is to recognize is that you're normal. It's your brain doing the thing that it was designed to do. However, we don't live in a cave anymore, and actually those perceived threats aren't, the same as a saber-toothed tiger getting ready to pounce on us. So knowing this and knowing that, it's something that we can do, actually what it comes down to is our emotional intelligence to help us see the situation, to think about our own feelings, our own thoughts, and what behavior is going to most be helpful. And it's true that most people don't recognize the effect that their own and others' emotions have on that behavior. And, the more that our role depends upon relationships, and most of us do need to work with other people, so, most of us do depend on relationships, the more critical it is for us to think and to be aware of emotional intelligence. And Daniel Goleman is sort of one of the gurus in terms of emotional intelligence, and says that the capacity for recognizing our own feelings and those for others, for motivating ourselves, managing our emotions well in ourselves and our relationships. That's what emotional intelligence is in a nutshell. So just as I said before, we've got these areas of the brain, the frontal lobe, which is almost where the rational processing happens, but then we've got the limbic brain, often called the reptilian brain, where actually our emotions are experienced. So our more primal reactions, for example, I've just heard the word feedback, I want to run away. That happens in the limbic part of the brain that's trying to prepare yourself. Whereas the frontal part, if we get comfortable with actually feedback being a good thing, that's how those two parts can work together, and to use those senses to actually slow your heartbeat down, tell your body that it's okay. So there's more that you can read, from Daniel Goleman, lots of articles and TEDx talks out there to help you understand this in a bit more detail. But we always find it really helpful to let people know that this is what's going on. This is why stuff feels uncomfortable, but it doesn't have to always feel that way. So knowing all of this, why is it important that we have these uncomfortable conversations? Why do these matter? So again, just pop into chat, or if you'd like to share with us, just jump in and say, what would happen if we didn't have these uncomfortable conversations? Why do they matter? Sarah, how about you? Why does this matter?
I mean, that's literally the question I have to talk to myself before I have a conversation, is instead of saying, oh God, why do I have to do this? Why do I have to do it? I'm more like, what's going to happen if I don't do it? Or I'm going to have to do it at some, so if it's around pay, it's okay, well, if I don't have this conversation, I'm not going to get a pay rise. So I either need to have the conversation or not. So it's kind of, to me, I do have to kind of twist it on its front when I'm about to have these conversations and just say, what's the alternative to not doing it? But I mean, I also think uncomfortable conversations can actually lead to real benefits. I think once you get that all out on the table, it might be that you think it's going to be uncomfortable or challenging, but then you might realize actually it's a difference in communication style, and once you've had that conversation about why each of you are finding it difficult, you can actually then move forward with more effective management. Yeah. So I do think it can really lead to benefits. It's just making sure that you communicate that effectively. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, definitely. Switching it around, what would happen if I didn't do this? And am I happy for things to stay the same? And as people on the chat are just sharing, your problems get worse if not confronted, to help people achieve their potential, to show them the gap around, where they need to develop, to open up new perspectives, to remove the blinkers that we often have if we don't get feedback. And in there around, effective communication of your viewpoint, and to enable everybody to understand that viewpoint. Some great responses in there. And you can drive yourself a little crazy if you keep thinking it over and over without action. I was on a workshop last week and we talked about, actually, if we don't share this stuff, it can really bubble up, and sometimes it can do more harm than good, can't it, in terms of the relationship. And we don't live in a simple, linear world. You've probably heard of that phrase, a VUCA world. So it's volatile, uncertain, it's complex, it's ambiguous, and we can't do the things that the way that we've always done them. We have to keep learning new information, and that is through being challenged and through people providing new information that sometimes might be difficult to hear. So, particularly for the work that we do and the environments that we operate, this is really important. And as Sarah's put on there as well, for resilience, for learning, and for development to progress. So great performance and great innovation arguably comes from having the courage and confidence to have conversations that matter. And it is sometimes the hardest ones are the most important ones to have. We talk about conversations a lot at CAPE, and we say that relationships are built one conversation at a time. So, when we think about how many conversations that we need to have to build an effective working relationship, there are many. So we're going to just hear from a couple of people now in terms of your experiences of uncomfortable or courageous conversations. Can you think of a time when something needed to be said, and what did you do? You don't need to give us the details of the the situation, but what did you do to help yourself step into that space, and what was the impact of doing it? So does anybody have a good example that they'd like to share with us?
Me? Hello.
Did you come off mute? Yeah.
I am. I can give one. I just wrote a couple of examples. Hi, Lindsay. I met you last week.
I know. I saw your name. I was like, hello.
I was like, oh, CAPE again. Your titles must speak to me, I think. So a couple of examples. I had a terrible boss once, but I knew the big boss very well. And for me, I needed to let him know how shocking this boss was. But so I had to go and tell him what is he being paid for, because he was terrible. But I felt like I could have that conversation with the big boss because I knew him well. But I also find that I can use, if I get annoyed about something's wrong. So I can use that anger to go and use it for good. And then again, another one, but it's the same boss. I must have had a really good boss at this, but it's not my boss now, but it was a really good boss. About pay rise, I felt I was really underpaid. And I think twice I went to him and I was like, I need a pay rise. And both times I got it. So again, I was angry and it helped motivate me to go and have, but yeah, it's a bit different than clients going, clients, you need to give me more money, because that's not in, it's easy when it's not in the scope. But it's the unforeseen ground conditions, which is a problem in our line of work, that I find those tricky conversations, different.
What I was hearing there from you, Lauren, was that there's almost a sense of that you felt that something needed to be said, and used that in a way to spur you on, to give you the drive and motivation to have those those difficult conversations. And that's often where we know what's the right thing to do or not. And people sometimes call it your moral compass or your values. But, if something's sitting there, then that means that there's usually is a conversation to be had. And then obviously thinking about the most, effective way to create the environment to have that conversation. So yeah, thanks, Lauren. Thank you. Any others?
I'm happy to share a couple of examples. So yeah, there's something about kind of working with a member of staff, like in a previous role that I hadn't had any direct like encounters with before. I'm really sort of like struggling through that relationship because I didn't really know how that person worked, and basically kind of having to well, the approach I took was talking to their manager to kind of explain the situation and like ask for some advice on like ways to go about it. So that was one. And then another time as well, sort of talking about concerns I had like with a new member of staff and not thinking that they were necessarily doing what I was expecting them to do, and having to sort of have that conversation as well of sort of where does that leave me fitting into this, and like ending up taking on extra projects, basically having challenging conversations around those two things.
It's sometimes it is reaching out to somebody else, isn't it, to say, if you know this person, if you've had this situation, can I talk through some different options? Can you give me some guidance there? Thank you, Jo. Thanks. And Sarah?
Yeah, I mean, I think many things spring to mind, but there was one when I was quite a young engineer on site and I was representing the client, and I was just there as like a watching brief over a remediation contractor, and they were doing something that the health and safety implications were pretty shocking, and there was quite a few guys complaining of being quite ill through this action, or this basically they weren't implementing like appropriate RPE, and it wasn't really my role. I was only really there from a contaminated land perspective, but I did have to go and speak to the site manager, and we all know they can be a little terrifying sometimes, and I think I was like 23 and not quite as confident as perhaps I am now, and and I did, because I couldn't see like all these guys. One guy was like sick because he was so poorly from what was happening, and I was just like, I just can't. But that's quite scary to go up to someone when it's not your company and it's not necessarily your role. But on a site like that, I guess from a health and safety perspective, the whole brother's keeper thing, so I did feel really good afterwards, but at the time terrified.
And
that's the right thing.
It is. Health and safety discussions is a great example of around having courageous conversations, and often we might step into those ones more comfortably because we know the purpose that sits really firm behind it, that we know that there is risk to life, risk to health and injury, and so that often is the driver. And again, that can link with values. We don't talk about it on here due to the time that we've got, but there's a great model to look at around psychological safety, and that stems from the Chernobyl incident, where people didn't feel comfortable to speak up about the risks that were there, and so a lot of people lost their lives. But creating the environment to have those conversations is really important for us if we're managers and leaders, but for everybody, just as you say there, Sarah, to not walk by and to
I think as well, like if you think you're like stepping over a boundary, so obviously like on a site, for example, you'd have like a consultant, maybe a client, maybe a contractor, you always get the argument back of like, well, we know what we're doing, like this is what we do day in, day out, blah blah blah. I was also a remediation contractor at the time, little did they know, but it's always that like, well, who do you think you are coming to us? Like this isn't your role, like why are you doing this? But sometimes unfortunately it has to be said. But
it's the positive intent that sits behind these courageous conversations that matter. So thank you for sharing those. And Naomi's just going to take us through now a couple of tools that might be useful to take away and to use in these situations.
Yeah, okay, so I'm going to talk to you about one, and then we're going to kind of do a little bit of something a bit more practical as we go through the rest of the time that we've got together. So has anybody come across this idea of radical candor before as a concept?
Never.
No. Catherine, you have?
Oh, I said never.
Never. Okay. All right. So we share, you know, we're not theory heavy as an organisation, but there's a couple of things that we really like that we sort of weave through what we do. And the whole premise behind this idea, it's all about hitting that sweet spot of challenging directly and caring personally. So it's a picture of Kim Scott's book there, which this model comes from. And she talks about there being these two dimensions that when you put them both together and you consider both of them, you can move forward more positively. So there's this idea of caring personally. So that's about going, and I think some of the examples that we were hearing just before really speak to this, but going beyond just the professional. It's more than just thinking about someone's job. It's about caring and considering that person as a human being and interacting with them on a human to human level. And that idea of challenging directly is saying what needs to be said. If we do one without the other, it's unlikely to land, but we can be much more likely to create an environment where there's trust. As soon as someone really feels like we do care, then they're either more likely to hear the feedback, or if it's going to be feedback, or and do something with it. So some of you might have come across the idea of support and challenge. There's very similar sort of links here of balancing, and it goes back to what Lindsay was just saying before around the environment that you create. If we're thinking about that, bringing support, but also not shying away from some of the difficult conversations, that we can make sure that these can land. And in the sweet spot of that, we get this idea of radical candor. And the reason she talks about the reason she uses the word radical in that actually saying what needs to be said, saying the difficult message, goes against maybe what we're socially conditioned to do, or maybe what we've grown up experiencing and seeing others do. So that's the uncomfortable bit, the bit about pushing ourselves out of our comfort zone. And in her book, she uses, so it's an American book, and you'll kind of see from the language on the next slide that come to life a bit more, but she uses this example. Okay, it's quite a light-hearted example, but to really bring this message out. So someone's got their zip on their trousers down. We've all been in that situation where you think, do I say something? Do I not? This feels a bit uncomfortable, but what happens when they stand up and they go to their next meeting? If we manage to achieve that radical candor, we're really conscious of caring about that person and not wanting them to be embarrassed. But we also know we need to say what needs to be said. So we kind of quite subtly just kind of take them aside and whisper, you fly, you sit down. If we don't bring in that the care, then we're criticizing. We don't care if they're embarrassed. Hey, look, have you seen that? Have you seen Lindsay's got her flies down? Lindsay, you need to, we don't care. The other side, that's that obnoxious aggression she talks about. But the left, the bottom left, when we're more interested in ourselves and being liked, or we don't care enough to challenge what needs or say what needs to be said, that she terms that manipulative insincerity. So we keep quiet because we don't want us to feel embarrassed, ourselves to feel embarrassed. And then the top left, just to finish that off, we're worried about the other person's feelings. We care, but we're too worried about their feelings to actually say what needs to be said. So our desire, our driver, is to avoid discomfort. And often all that leads to is more discomfort. If it was a one-on-one meeting and they go and somebody else tells them, hang on a second, why didn't Sarah tell me? That's a bit much. She must have seen it. So there's that comes out. And we love this model as a way of thinking. This isn't just about being really critical or difficult in the messages that we have to give, but actually it's balancing that caring personally and challenging directly. So you can do a bit more reading, and there's some really nice videos and TED Talks and interviews where she talks about and brings this model to life. So, you know, I think we've talked about this a little bit already, and some of you shared in chat a little while ago what happens if you don't have these conversations. So often those fears that we have about what's going to happen if we do have these conversations, I might be rejected, I might lose the relationship, or the relationship might sour, the issue might escalate, so let's just keep it as it is now. I might not be taken seriously. People might say, well, who do you think you are? Sarah's point before. Emotions could escalate, or I might hurt their feelings. All of those are some of the things and the reasons why we avoid having uncomfortable or courageous conversations. But as some of you have said, the reality is that the same impacts happen if we don't have them as well. So if we don't have the conversations that need to happen, or we don't care enough to share with somebody something that's really going to help improve their performance, or, you know, could impact somebody's health and safety on site, if we don't have those, the same outcomes could happen, which is it's a really important way of looking at it. Okay, Linz, you're going to just take us through, to build on this a little bit, some of the principles of communication.
Yeah, so we decide that the conversation needs to happen, that the positive intent is there, and that we're going to step into this space, whatever it might be, that we need to embrace. So how can we use communication to do that in these tricky conversations? And so, you know, some of you might say, or, you know, people that, you know, will say, well, communication's easy. I do it every day. I've been doing it since I was as a child. How many people put on their CV, I'm great at communication? It's just something that we just say we do. And actually, when we step back and we think about it, there are many reasons why communicating effectively is actually really difficult, and that there is an opportunity for us all to raise our awareness around our communication skills. And there's a great model really here that I'll show you on the next slide, which is coming on to. So, you know, the thought that one person might be having, and then how they transmit that through communication to another person so they have the same understanding, is complex. So it isn't as easy as I think a triangle, so Naomi thinks a triangle, because there's lots of other elements at play. Challenges are that if we are thinking different things, so if I'm thinking a triangle and Naomi tells me she's thinking a square, I blame her for not understanding me properly. It's her fault. She didn't get what I was talking about. You're not listening to me. You're just not understanding what I'm saying. I'm going to keep saying it in the same way, but she's going to keep saying a square. And there's a reason why this happens. So when we look at a model for communicating, when we think about what is happening when we want to pass some information on to somebody else, well, this is what it looks like. And this is by Shannon and Weaver. So we have a thought in our brains, we encode that into a language, which might be, you know, our spoken language, might be what we're doing with our body language, might be our tone, our pace, and that the way that we encode that then gets transmitted across to the other person. They receive it, they decode it, interpret it, and they have an understanding. What you have in these encode and decode phases are different lenses. And our lenses can be shaped by our mindset. And that could be, you know, the mindset that we have today. Are we having a good day or a bad day? Could be our mindset in general. Have we got a fixed mindset that we only think one way and we don't like to adapt and change? Or have we got a growth mindset? What's our experiences that have shaped us before? What are the things that are important to us, our values? How might our preferences be different to somebody else's, in that, you know, I like to problem solve by doing it with other people and talking about it. Other people might like to problem solve individually, reflecting, capturing their own thoughts. So in these encode and decode boxes, there's a whole world of stuff going on. And that might look like this: noise. To sum it all up, it's noise. So it could be the external noise that you're hearing around you that's distracting you, but a lot around what influences how messages are relayed and then understood is around this internal noise that's going on. So what are some of the things that we can do to consider the noise? Well, first of all, it's to expect that not every time your communication is going to land exactly how you wanted it received. And actually, a big part of it is owning your part of that communication, rather than going back to that example saying, well, I've just said it 10 times, why can't you understand? It's thinking about how we can adapt how we communicate to work with other people, tailoring the way that we share the message, the way that we get the message across, whether it is on the phone, whether it's via email, whether it's through using visual tools, if somebody really responds well to visual working. Telling a story often really happens because you bring emotion into what you're sharing here, and you're bringing more colour to the message. Asking for follow-up and feedback. So a great way to let somebody else know that you've heard them is to summarise and play back. So what I've just heard you say there, I think, is this: is that right? Checking in that you've really understood, or asking the other person. Being curious through some great questions, great open questions, can really help us understand each other. And listening, and that's, you know, really listening to understand, rather than listening to let our advice monster reply and jump in with the answers that we think that we know that the person wants. So we talk about advice monsters a lot on the work that we do, and it's another human natural response. Doesn't mean that it's always going to be the most helpful when we're having tricky conversations. And the language that we use is really important here as well. So who knows about the word but? Any thoughts on why but is a tricky word to use? So typically, if we say something really positive, follow it by a but and another sentence, it undoes everything we've said at the start. Naomi, you were really good on that workshop today, but I think you could have been a bit more engaging in the way that you did it. Naomi would have forgotten everything I said in the first sentence and just would have hooked on the I wasn't engaging enough. So but is a really word to be used with real caution when you are using it in tricky sentences. And a few more tips here to consider: using a positive, helpful tone, asking how you can help the person. So sharing what needs to be said and asking them, what can we do to work together on this? How can I help you with this? Showing those values, showing that positive intent, showing that the care deeply part of radical candor becomes really important in those conversations. But so often when we are having something difficult to say, we often go into quite a task and a what frame of mind. The how element becomes really, really important here. And to show empathy, show understanding, which doesn't necessarily mean, you know, saying I know how you feel, but saying I've heard you say that that's really difficult for you. What I've heard you say here is this. We don't necessarily have to problem solve for somebody to have empathy, but we can just say, I've heard you. using the person's name, using those positive words, and as I said before, you know, feeding back, repeating what you've heard really helps people feel listened to. And yeah, great open questions, the what and the how. So there's some stuff in there that is common sense, and that we do it normally. However, when you're under pressure, when you're under stress, what might be going on for you that means all of this good stuff sometimes doesn't happen as much as you would like it to. And that's the challenge, isn't it? When we've got the adrenaline flowing, when we're feeling stressed, our communication good intentions might not be what we want them to be. Any thoughts on what we've just shared there? There's quite a lot in there around communication and radical candor.
There was one thing you mentioned and it made me think of a few things that like happened in the office, particularly like on projects where like me and my colleagues might have disagreements as such. And it's like, I think like learning to communicate your intent of a conversation. So like the one thing that springs to mind is like, you know, if someone's kind of come to you with a problem, it's like, are you looking for a solution, or are you looking for me to listen and just kind of you to vent? Because if you're looking to vent and someone starts to offer you a solution, some people get really, really annoyed by that. They're like, I don't need help. Like, I know what I'm doing. I just need to vent. Or if they're looking for a solution and all you do is sit back and don't offer anything, that can also come across like that also doesn't lead to a good conversation. So I guess it's learning to like communicate, if you're the person, like what you want out of that conversation can really help to like lead to, I guess, getting out of it what you need.
Yeah, completely, Sarah. Yeah, and that the responsibility can sit on both people in the conversation. So, you know, if you're coming to somebody, you know, with something, it's saying, I'd just really like a chance for you to listen to this. Or if you're the person that's being approached, you can start it off with, what would be most helpful for me to do in the 5 minutes we've got together?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, it kind of avoids some of that noise happening, because actually you've got out there a lot more clearly what it is that's going on in that conversation, what you need.
Yeah, and like people will approach things very differently. So like I might approach something very differently to you, Naomi, and it's understanding how that person wants to approach it and not how you would. So
yeah. And there's a phrase that people have used for years, which was treat others how you would like to be treated, whereas the reality is around treat others how they want to be treated. And we don't know unless we ask them. And whether these are new relationships or relationships with people that we've known for a long time at work, actually asking them, if we have a difference of opinion, how would you like us to work it out? Ask them.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're going to build on this a little bit now and share with you a model, a framework, and part of that is I'll talk to you a little bit about accounting for different preferences too, and within that. So tricky conversations. We've talked quite a bit about the idea of courageous conversations, this idea of actually putting ourselves out of our comfort zone. Let's go back to this, how we have some of these difficult conversations. So another book that we quite like, or a model that comes from it, is just thinking about these three factors are often present, or are usually present when we are thinking about having a tricky conversation. They're usually present for us, but also for the other person, maybe not in the same way. So opinions vary. You think you're ready for a promotion, maybe your boss doesn't. Just that difference of opinion, that difference of view can give rise to this conversation being tricky. Stakes are high. You know, it could impact on business performance, cost impacts, or it's a client that's really important to you. There's a business impact, which can sometimes both get in the way of and impact how we show up in these conversations. And emotions run strong. It matters to you. So, and when we were talking before, there's a couple of examples where people were using, actually, it feels, that moral compass. Lindsay said it feels wrong. I need to say something here. Sometimes we treat those emotions that we feel as a reason why we shouldn't have the conversation, but actually just recognizing this matters to me. So those three factors come together, which no wonder these conversations are difficult if all of these factors are at play. And we also said that we would come back briefly to, yeah, sorry, I've just seen the message in chat there. Definitely. It's all about, thank you, Caroline, message around conversations might be these sorts of conversations may be a real struggle for someone who's neurodiverse, and recognizing and trying to understand what the other person needs from you. So we said we'd come back to this idea of confrontation. A couple of you used it in chat before, and I think it's got really strong connotations, that idea of confrontation and what it means. But if we reframe that initially and thought of it as, well, that word con in Spanish is with. If we reframed confrontation to, rather than being across the room from the other person, firing whatever message it is that you need to give at them, confront, being with somebody, sitting side by side and holding a difficult issue where opinions might vary, where emotions run strong, and where there are stakes that are high, holding that issue in front of you, and both of you looking at it and trying to find a way forward. I think just thinking about it with that slight reframe can often really help how we feel about going into that conversation. Okay, now I said we're going to give you something practical. So I'm just going to recap the fact that we've talked about lots of different types of conversations. All of the things on this slide fall into that camp of tricky or requiring courage, difficult messages, someone's differing opinion, costs, admitting mistakes, all of these sorts of things. But we're going to hone in on giving feedback. We're going to hone in on this idea of dealing with underperformance, dealing with behaviour, because we could spend a whole session on any of those. We wanted to give you something practical to take away. So feedback conversations, underperformance conversations. Has anybody come across any models before that they've been taught around having these types of conversations? Sandwich, is that what's going to be in chat? Have a look. 360 feedback. Okay, so yeah, 360 feedback is a great way of actually really helping people to get that, sometimes anonymous, which then allows people to feel like they can share more openly. Yeah, feedback loops, brilliant. So some of the common pitfalls that happen are when we start with the question of, how's it going? Kind of like we start with, we're just going to have a nice little catch up here, and then you go in with, I need to share this. Just, if this was the intent behind your conversation, just start with that. The sandwich, people come across that, the proverbial feedback sandwich. Yeah, so that's this whole idea of Lindsay used the word but before, but you sandwich this difficult message between two slices of positive bread. So, this is going really well. You need to improve your assertiveness in that meeting, but don't worry, because it's great that client's happy at the moment. What do you do with that, apart from being really confused about what the heck the message is? Softening it too much, back to our radical candor. If we don't care enough, we're often not challenging directly and saying what needs to be said. Being too woolly and wishy-washy, assuming we know the response, assuming we know how it's going to play out, or focusing feedback on, it's all about just what I have to say. No, that's just the start. you're putting the topic on the table. What's most important there is how you two then come together to find a solution. But often we're focusing and so preoccupied with what we have to say that takes up all of our thinking space. So before I share with you this model then that we really like, some things to consider. Sarah talked about intent before, and this is really important I think, for us to think about. So whenever I'm considering in my roles where I led teams or I'm working with people, wherever we're thinking about giving feedback, actually one of the ways of really checking in on, is this the right thing to be doing here, is asking yourself some of these questions. How might I feel receiving this? What's my intention? Is it a positive one to help that person to learn and grow, or is it so that I can undermine them and come out on top? You know, really, what's our intent here? Am I making assumptions about this person? Am I making some assumptions about what's going on here that I might need to check out? Have I set realistic goals? Am I asking for something or expecting something that isn't fair or realistic? And have I been clear on what I expect? You know, back to that whole point around communication, if I said to somebody, I need that ASAP, and to me that's in the next hour, but to them that's by the end of the week, is it really fair that I can expect them to have completely understood what I've said? So it's really, really normal for all of this to feel uncomfortable, but that check-in with ourselves on those things can help us just, I suppose, give ourselves permission that, yeah, you know what, all these things are in place. This needs to happen. I'm just going to go into give it, and there's quite a lot here. I'm going to share with you this model, and then we're going to do a little bit of an exercise to put this into practice. So you can do a bit more chatting then. So we like this model, which we call the cared model, and it's built, you know, it's a blend of things that you might have seen, I statements or a situation, in impact, behavior, the SIB model. There's loads of different versions of something similar. But having a framework and a model to share, to structure your message is really important and can be really, really helpful in us feeling more confident. So there's 5 parts of the model. Context. So that's the context in which the action or behavior is taking place. So I know that this project is high pressure. I know the client is really, really tricky on this project. I'm giving feedback, but I'm not in a bubble here. I'm understanding and bringing into play the context that's going on. And that might be understanding that we've got a bit of an involvement or a bit of a part to play in whatever's happening here as well. The action, what it is that's under question. So what it is that person's doing, and specifically, the word specifics there, as specifically as possible. This is the bit that often gets missed. So we might say, you know, this report, the figures in the report were inaccurate. But without the impact, it doesn't land. The figures in the report were inaccurate. The impact is that the client really isn't, we haven't built that trust with the client yet, or we haven't kind of confirmed with them that we know what we're talking about. The impact, the implications, and being as specific as possible again. But then what we often do is go straight into, and you need to do this about it. Actually opening that up for it to be more of a two-way conversation. So I'm going to share with you this message, and then I'm going to ask, what do you feel about that? What's your view of that? How does that sound? Is that a fair assessment? What's it like from your perspective? And pausing there and having a bit more of a conversation about it. And if sometimes they go, oh, you know what, I know, I need to make sure that I do that QA check. Okay, so we can move into finding a way forward to resolve that. But the reality is sometimes they don't see that. I don't know what you're talking about. Well, you should have checked it. It's not my responsibility to check it. This is where that D part comes in. So the change that needs to occur. So what we'd always suggest when you're considering the message that you want to give when you're giving feedback is to have in your back pocket what needs to be different. Not to lead with that, because ideally through the discussion, that other person sees that for themselves. But if they don't, this needs to change. Something needs to change here because of the impact that this is having. This is what I need to be different. Okay, welcome back, everybody. Now, we know we would love to have given you, sometimes when we're with groups, if we give you sort of a good half an hour to really understand and think about how you might use this framework to construct a feedback message, because that's essentially what we're doing here. So you wouldn't have had time to really get into too much of detail on that. But what would people like to share from reflections on it as a model and just your discussions in your breakout groups? What would you like to share?
Well, one thing we kind of talked about, so in my team, someone had a specific example.
Yeah.
But one thing that came up was, this is a really useful framework to use, but one thing that's important is the timing when you have these conversations, or when you can have these conversations, as to what that kind of desired development could feasibly be. So it kind of, I guess, underlines the importance of not putting off conversations you don't want to have, and also kind of adapting the model depending on what is actually possible at that time of the conversation.
Yeah. So timing comes into play in a couple of different situations here, or a couple of different factors here. You can only really be specific if you're doing it in a timely way. So sharing a message before it gets too far down the line allows you to be specific, but also the timing allows you to think about what really is realistic in that desired development. And another point that I think timing comes in that we maybe haven't touched on is the timing to have that productive conversation. So if we think about different people's preferences, some people will be quite open to say, oh, right, okay, yeah, I hear that bit of feedback, yeah, I do want to do something about it, yeah, let's have a chat about it. Some people will not. If you've got somebody who's much more reflective, it might be that they need to take that away and just let that settle before they're then able to have more of a productive conversation. So what I would always suggest to people is, doesn't mean you delay delivering the message that you might need to give, but at the point at which you kind of move from it being about the message to what's going to happen next, does now feel like a good time to have a discussion? I really want to support you to find a way forward. Would now be a good time, or should we come back together tomorrow? Don't leave it too long, but letting that person have some element of, empowering them to be the right time for them too. Because although it's the right time for you, it might not necessarily be the right time for them immediately. So thank you for raising that, Ethne. Sarah, come in.
Yeah, I think also building on that, and it's something that I don't know if this is going to be commented on now. It's, there's obviously so much that we can touch on, but I think especially post-COVID, everyone's working, a lot of people work from home. These kind of conversations are, or you need to decide the best way to have these conversations. So is that in person? Is that over the phone? Is that over Teams? I mean, obviously Teams is better if you can't be in person, but there are certain conversations that aren't good over email, because
definitely
you can't get across the tone, you can't receive how someone's saying it. Some conversations can come across very abrupt, some conversations can come across very blunt. I try not to have any kind of conversation like this, or in any kind of anything that could be deemed like a challenging conversation over email, for example. But there does seem to be a bit of a reticence in people these days to actually talk on the phone. I don't know why, but and I don't know if that's like I say generational, it makes me sound about 60 years old, but you know, a lot of people don't speak on the phone anymore. We text, we whatever. So people are more used to and more comfortable emailing somebody. One, that's always on record, which for some conversations like this, you obviously might not want things on record all the time. But as well, like if someone rang me and had a difficult conversation over the phone, I think that's quite a difficult thing to have. It's definitely better to do like in person. So that was my
completely. And I think it goes back to that slide. If I just flip back to the slide we had before, that bit about how might I feel receiving this, you know, how might this land best, what's the right situation or the right format. And we talked about communication a little bit and the noise that can be created because of that encoding and decoding over email. That adds a whole new layer of complexity to it. So yeah, being able to get that message across and interacting on a human to human level, which is why, even though some people might feel a little bit uncomfortable about this idea of writing a script, what we're suggesting is not to kind of go in and go, right, this is my message and I'm going to just, it's not about that. But the more we can really sit and think, what is it that I want to say? What is it that's the issue here? Kind of capturing the message, sharing the message allows it to land in the best possible way, allows it, you know, gives the person the utmost amount of respect that you really are thinking about your intention behind it and what you want to say. So I would always encourage you to just spend a little bit of time, and if it's appropriate, bounce off with somebody else. I need to share this difficult message. Obviously you've got to find the right person, but is that how does that sound? Well, how would that land for you? Does that need to be more specific?
Yeah, also maybe like when you if you want to set up like a meeting with them, just explain briefly what it is you want to discuss, so someone's going into it with a bit of an understanding and they're not entirely blindsided. So I always quite like to just send a little like few bullet points or have a quick conversation with them first, of being like, well, I want to have a quick chat about this, you know, I'm going to put a meeting in, just so the kind of the intent, I guess, coming back to that, the meeting is out there for everyone involved. Otherwise, if you're taking a bit off the back foot by something, immediately you feel a bit like you're at a disadvantage.
Definitely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. It's about ultimately making it a two-way conversation, not I'm going to give you this feedback and you have to take that away and just do something with it. I need to share it, but we're going to sit together side by side and look at this and find a way forward. So what's the best way possible to achieve that? We could go for, we could take up all of Luke's time, which we're obviously not going to do. Sorry, Luke, but sorry that we've taken up 5 minutes. I mean, but I'd really like to finish by just asking you to think about what are your key takeaways, and if you could pop into chat what one action you're going to commit to as a result of the session today. It's great putting it down because it makes us more accountable, but also for everybody else, you kind of get some ideas of what your peers are going to try. Just pop into chat. What one action will you commit to as a result of today? What one action? Yeah, relationships are built on conversation one at a time. So even some of it, it's not about just the okay, this is this big thing, focus on that. Each conversation, each time we check in, each time we get to know a person a bit more. Response part, yeah, okay, what do you think? Opening it up. It's not all about what we have to say. It's more important what the other person has to say. Yeah, have more of those conversations. Yeah, absolutely. It's okay to say you don't know the answer. Yeah, I just need to check on that. Embrace discomfort. Love that. That's a great way for us to finish up. Yeah, embracing discomfort, because discomfort doesn't mean that it's the wrong thing to do. It's our brains kind of keeping us safe in a way that maybe we don't necessarily need, because we don't live in caves anymore. So thank you for today. Thank you for having us back. Or I know that Ethne and kind of the team will send out the recording to yourselves, and we'll send the slides. You've got those. We'd love for you to connect with us on LinkedIn and engage with us there. So if you do, then we can add you to the group, and you can see some of the content that we post. We'd really ask if you if you post anything about today, please, these slides we've created for you guys, so to keep them for you, for your purposes. So if you could kind of refrain from, I suppose, posting the specific content that we've shared today, because that is designed for you. But we will share the slides afterwards. And any questions, you know where we are.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Naomi and Lindsay. That was a really thought-provoking workshop on communication. Without further ado, and also lots of really useful tools to take forward. So I'm sure we'll all be using these now and be communicating very effectively with everyone, I hope. I'm just going to move straight on now to introduce our next speaker for the last part of this event. So really pleased to be joined by Luke Martin, who's going to be talking about how self-awareness can improve communication skills. So Luke is an Associate Director and Chartered Environmental Consultant at ORS, an Irish multidisciplinary engineering consultancy. Luke has over 10 years experience providing consultancy service to a variety of clients, including multinational fuel companies, large industrial and pharmaceutical clients, and industrial emissions license site. Aside from his role as an environmental consultant, though, Luke is also responsible for the rollout of a personal development program at ORS, which I think he's going to be talking a bit about today. So thanks very much, Luke, and over to you.
Excellent. Thanks for the introduction, Ethne. I really appreciate it. And thanks to Lindsay and Naomi. I thought that I've got about 4 pages of notes here from that. So it was really, really well done presentation. So thank you very much. I'm going to try and keep my presentation interactive as well. Now, only got about 15 minutes, so if we don't get through all the content, apologies. But I would just like to begin with a request. So I'm going to put a few questions out there, and I'd like to invite everyone to pop their answers in the chat box below. Just trying to pull up the chat here. So the first question I have, I'd just like to get a flavour of what everyone's job titles is at the moment. So if you could just pop in what your current role is into the chat box, I'd very much appreciate it. Communities and Partnership Lead, Ethne, thank you. Principal Geosciences Consultant, Catherine. Lead Special Advisor, Hydrogeologist, Engineering Geologist, Hydrogeologist, Senior Environmental Consultant, Environmental Consultant, Environmental Consultant. Great. So we're all roughly from very similar backgrounds. Community and Membership Engagement Officer. Oh, that's you, Joe. Perfect. Okay, so would I be kind of right in saying that a lot of us are kind of dealing with problem solving on a daily basis? Yeah, perfect. So I just kind of want everyone to think about the roles for a second and I want you to tell me what the most important skills you have that you have to apply on a daily basis to do your job well. You just pop out a couple of things that you need every day, skills that you call upon in order to do your job effectively. Communication. So I think, Ross, you were paying attention to the last one. Yeah. Collaboration, teamwork, critical thinking. Yeah, communication. Communication's coming up there a lot, which is good to see. Influencing management, strategic thinking. Remaining neutral, view both sides, communication, technical advising. Okay, so communication is obviously a standout there, definitely one of the most important skills in consulting. On a scale of 1 to 10, how important do you think communication is? Would it be fair to say it's probably the most important communication or most important skill you'd have? Yeah, as a consultant. Okay. Okay, so what I want to introduce today is it's a behavioral model, a behavioral assessment tool, and I believe it is a cheat code to some of the teams that Naomi and Lindsay introduced earlier, particularly the Shannon Weaver model of the simple tool for communication. So I think if I can introduce this to you, it might help you skip a few of the uncertainties when it comes to communicating with people you're not too sure about or you're not too familiar with. So sorry now. So just going to throw the sentence up here for a second. Communication happens on the listener's terms. Okay, so I'll explain who Thomas Erickson is after. But would anyone like to have a stab at explaining what that might mean or interpreting that sentence? Is anyone brave enough to come off mute and provide their interpretation?
I can look.
Yeah, thanks, Ross. Go ahead.
Yeah, I suppose it's basically that if the listener doesn't share the same perception as the person basically making the point, they won't hear what they want to hear. The desired outcome won't be achieved.
Yeah, exactly. So putting yourself in your person's shoes. So everything you say to a person is kind of filtered through their frame of references and biases and their preconceived ideas. And I think Lindsay and Naomi had a great diagram earlier kind of displaying that. So what I want to show you today is a tool that can kind of short circuit that process a little bit. If you just look at this sentence, communication happens on the listener's terms, and you put that beside the title of the presentation, do they kind of contradict each other almost? So self-awareness can improve your communication skills. Communication happens on the listener terms. Would anyone agree that's a bit of a slight contradiction? Yeah, okay. So after I present this tool, we're going to have a look at these two sentences again, and we can kind of see if there's more clarity around that. Okay. So I'm just going to take this off full screen for a second for this next part. Okay. So I want everybody to think about their own role and their own environment in work. Okay. And I want to think, when you go about your day-to-day role, okay, are you fast-paced or moderate-paced? And then the second thing I want you to think about is, do you like to deal with tasks or do you like to deal with people? Okay, so I'd like to invite everybody on the call to enter 2 words into the chat. So are you fast or moderate or task or people oriented? You just put it into the chat there, please. Catherine, task and fast. Okay. Okay, so the 4 names I have up on the screen there: Catherine, Ethne, Matthew. Matthew, is your first name? Is that correct?
Yeah, correct.
Perfect. So I've got you in the blue corner and I've got Colin in the green corner. Okay. Would everybody whose name is up on the screen there, would you be brave enough to have a mini interview with me? Would you be able to?
Sure.
Would you? Yeah. Okay. So, Catherine, we have yourself up in the red corner. Okay. So what we would describe you in the workplace is a dominant person. Okay. So I'm going to throw out a few adjectives, and I want you to tell me if you would agree they apply to you or not. Okay.
Mhm.
So would you or other colleagues describe you as assertive, repetitive, direct, driving, and inquisitive? Would all those adjectives describe you, or would you disagree with them?
The last 3, I am a very direct, blunt communicator. So I'm not a people person. I like tasks, and I like to be in control of those tasks.
Okay. And thinking about things that might scare you, would I be right in saying that one of the things that would terrify you the most would be a fear of failure? Would that be correct?
I always want to do the best that I can do for myself and my clients.
Yeah, okay.
So yes.
Okay, perfect. All right, thank you very much. Okay, in the yellow corner we have Ethne. So Ethne, would you mind taking yourself off mute for a second? Okay.
Sure.
So in the yellow corner we might describe you as an influencer. Okay, and I'm not talking about the Instagram influencers. It's just a behavioral style. Okay. So if I were to describe these attitudes, would you agree with these? They might be reflective to you. So you're highly communicative and friendly, be quite influential, quite persuasive, and overall a very kind of glass half full kind of person. Would they be all accurate descriptions of yourself?
Pretty much.
Okay. And the tough part, the areas that you might find tough or your biggest fear, would I be right in saying it might be a fear of rejection or loss of popularity? Would that be true, or would you wouldn't like falling out with people?
Yeah, no, I don't like falling out with people.
Okay, excellent. Okay, so we'll go down then to Cathal. Cathal, you're down in the green corner. Cathal, I'd say, would it be right in saying you're a very dependable, good listener, quite methodical, quite persistent, and you'll kind of execute tasks. You give it your best, but if you're under pressure, you'll kind of just keep trucking along and keep going at your own pace. Would that kind of apply to you?
Yeah, that'd sum me up, yeah.
Okay, so you be down in the steady corner. Okay, so we describe you as steady, and so Ethne is the influencer, Catherine is the dominant type, and then you're high in steadiness. Okay, so Matthew, you're my last person I'd like to interview. Would you be able to come off mute?
Yeah, no problem.
Perfect. So Matthew, you be down in the conscientious corner, okay, the blue corner. And would it be fair to say you're very accurate, very thorough, you're very you kind of deal with things with a logical head. You'll do things, and you'll kind of go about decisions with your head rather than your heart. Would they be correct assumptions?
Yeah, that's true.
And your biggest fear would being proved wrong in something. Would that be one of the worst things that could possibly happen to you?
Yeah, I don't think I'd like that. Yeah.
Probably doesn't happen very often, though, does it?
No, oh no, of course.
Okay, well, just while I have you, Matthew, I might just delve a little bit deeper, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure.
I'm actually delighted that I have a blue person who will talk, because a lot of times blue people wouldn't actually open up for an interview. So you're very, very brave. Thank you. So what I'd like to ask you is, just thinking, let's say it's a Friday evening and you're going to watch your favorite show on Netflix. Can I ask what kind of genre you're into?
All sorts, takes all sorts.
Would you be into your kind of crime or kind of very deep layered kind of?
Yeah, it can be. Yeah, it can be.
Yeah. And let's say you're sitting in the room with somebody who's not like you, say a mate or a partner or a sibling, somebody who has a really different personality, let's say the opposite to you. Can you just picture that for a second?
Yep.
Okay, so you're watching it and you're watching your favorite show. Let's say something. You watch Mindhunter?
I did. I watched the first series. Yeah.
Watch the first series. Did you enjoy it?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, I did.
Yeah. So I think I've got your pegged. So Mindhunter, you kind of have to follow along. There's a lot of things happening. There's kind of a dense plot. Yeah. So let's say you're there and you have your sister, who's a yellow sister like Ethne. Okay, and they love to chat, and they're talking about their, what happened, or, oh, I think this is what's going to happen next, or that person killed this person. Would it be right in kind of saying that would kind of grind your gears and kind of annoy you?
Yes.
Yeah, you kind of, you're no, we're here to watch the film, or we're here to watch the program, no talking. Would that be correct?
Yeah. It depends how the day's gone or the week's gone, but yeah, that's I could certainly see myself that way. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. All right, thank you very much. I'll take you off the hot seat, and I really appreciate your participation to everyone participating. Okay.
No worries.
So the point of that little social exercise is, it's just a nice, easy introduction to the DISC model. Okay, so it's the DISC behavioral model. So you've got your D, dominance; I, influence; S, steadiness; C, conscientiousness. And the reason I'm introducing this is because I believe it's a really powerful tool for communication. And the reason being, I've only asked people 2 simple questions, and I was able to make all of these assumptions about their personality. And from what I can see, I will admit there was probably one stooge in the audience. So Cathal is a colleague of mine, but Catherine, Ethne, and Matthew, I think you'll all agree that we've never met before. Would that be correct?
Correct.
Yep.
Okay, so does anyone have an idea where this might be useful in consultancy, and where this module might apply? Anyone brave enough to take themselves off mute? Anyone who maybe hasn't spoken yet? Lauren, you seem to be have a lot of opinions in the breakout room.
No. So when we use this, it's definitely if you're not getting anywhere with someone, maybe, I don't know, try and tackle it a different way.
Well, do you think it might help you put yourself in another person's shoes?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because everyone's different, aren't they?
Exactly. So if we refer back to this slide, communication happens on the listener's terms. The more we know about our listener, or the more we know about our counterpart, the better we can tailor our communication with them. Okay. So that's kind of the crux of this tool. Okay. And the point I wanted to make was it's quite simple to kind of make these assumptions about people after one or two conversations. And I actually picked up from Naomi and Lindsay's, my key quote from that was, relationships are built one conversation at a time. So, you know, after about 3 or 4, if you're dealing with a client or a new colleague, you could make assertions about these. And the more you know about the DISC model, it's very easy to interpret them and tailor communication accordingly. Okay. So we'll skip this slide because we're running out of time, but I've got a little quick exercise. Okay, so what this exercise is, I'm going to bring up a couple of people onto the screen, and I want you, our new experts in DISC, to try and interpret what profile they might be on the DISC model. Okay, so first up, we got 2 ex-presidents of America. Does anyone take themselves off mute, or you can use the chat? Anyone want to guess where either of these might sit on the DISC model?
Would Obama be like steady or conservative? I don't know.
What makes you say that?
He was pretty good, wasn't he? Steady. Yeah, but then obviously the opposite, Trump, high-paced, decisive, but not in a good way.
Not in a good way. Okay, that's an interesting one. Okay, so believe it or not, Obama is actually he'd be quite a. Both of these characters would be dominant. Okay, but one more than the other, and the more dominant is obviously Trump in his red tie there. Okay, so what Trump kind of displays is kind of toxic dominance, and then what you have with Obama is he's kind of more of a charismatic dominance. So he's not so he's very task oriented. He would prefer to deal with tasks over people, but also is actually quite high paced as well. I had a look at one of his, or a couple of his days of all the stuff he packs into a single day. He's very much a high D. So there's just little nuances there that you can take. The next person we've got up, Mr. Beckham. Where we put him on the DISC? Again, you can go into chat or you can come off mute.
More moderate than fast, I'd say.
More moderate, yeah. Anything else? So where would you put him? Would you put him on as a C or an S? Would you more people or task?
Not sure on that one.
He'd have to be people, wouldn't it? He's in a football team.
Exactly. So David Beckham would be down as steady. Okay. So he'd be down on the opposite side of these two. If you think he can ping a ball from 40 yards, that takes lots and lots of meticulous practice. So he'd be practicing. A lot of people might just get bored and give up. I'm unfortunately going to have to skip through the rest of this exercise because I'm out of time. So I'll just I'll skip on past the rest of it, and I'm just going to bring up onto the screen a couple of useful resources that I found really helpful. So the first one is by Thomas Erickson, who that initial quote came from, Surrounded by Idiots. If you want to read, or it's available on Audible. For DISC team workshops, you can contact the Jerry Duffy Academy. And finally, if you want to get your team profile, you can get download behavioral assessment from Thomas International. Thank you very much for your time, and I'll hand back over to Ethan.
Thank you so much, Luke. And sorry we ran into a little lack of time there, but some really useful approaches and tools to think about for how you can then tailor your communication. So thanks so much for that, Luke. It was really, really useful. If you're willing to share the slides with us afterwards, I can make sure that they're given out. So thank you so much. So I wanted to also say thank you everyone for sticking around for 2 hours. I hope you really found that useful and informative. Just a quick few messages before I let you all go and get that much needed cup of tea. So as Joe mentioned previously, this event was organised in collaboration between the IES, REMSOC and the Ireland Brownfield Network. If you don't know the IES, or the Institution of Environmental Sciences, we are a professional body representing the full spectrum of environmental disciplines. We do have a dedicated land condition community or special interest group, which also organises these tailored events for land conditions early career professionals. So we'll put a bit more, I'll put a link to our website in the box. I also wanted to flag that we've got a mentoring platform, which is perfect for early career professionals if you'd like to be a mentee. You're in control of what you get out of this platform. You can choose the stream that works for you. And it would be a really great way of getting some talking with more senior professionals and helping to get some guidance around particular areas, whether you're going for chartership or just more general mentoring. In terms of our partner organisations, Sarah's just run off, but she'd be able to help you with any questions related to REMSOC or the Remediation Society. Please do take a look at their website as well. And in terms of the Ireland Brownfield Network, they were established in 2012 by a group of environmental professionals with the aim of promoting the appropriate assessment and sustainable reuse of brownfield land across Ireland. The IBN is organised and run by volunteers and now has over 500 members in Ireland and further afield working in various areas. They also have a dedicated early career group established a couple of years ago. It's open to students, graduates and early career professionals. And the aim of that group is to bring together a network of young professionals involved in or seeking to be involved in brownfield redevelopment in Ireland. They provide networking opportunities, advice, complementary training options, professional development, and are looking to encourage professional qualifications with the relevant bodies. New members are also welcome, so please do let me know if you're interested in that as well. Thank you so much for taking part today. I hope you all enjoyed it and found it useful with some good tools to take away, and I hope you all have a great afternoon. Thanks very much, everyone.